welcome to the closing panel. I'm very pleased to have two guests with me, not only because of their experience, reputation, and knowledge, but because they are the two most frequent attendees of S4. So on the far end, I have Ralph Langner of Langner Communications in the Langner Group. Obviously, he's most famous for his work on Stuxnet, but he was coming to S4 well before Stuxnet, and since that time has written books, and right now is working on a project or a product called OT Base, which is an OT security program. And I know a number of you in the audience will be taking his class on Friday about how to create an OT security program. And Ralph has been here for all 10 S4s. This is actually the 10th S4, so we appreciate his support.
Yeah.
That was the only reason why I could crack Stuxnet. You know, all that preparation at S4, that helped me develop the capability.
If you want to have some fun, you can watch like the S4 2008 Langner presentation on hacking OPC or something like that. You did an OPC server one way back when.
2007.
2007,
yeah.
Year one. Okay, and then immediately to my left is Zach Tudor. He is currently with INL. He has been there for a little less than a year and is responsible for so many things. I can't even mention them all, but definitely the ICS security efforts there, amongst
so
other
many things. I don't know them all myself yet, but I'm trying to catch up.
And Zach had a perfect record until last year. He missed last year's S4, but he has attended 9 of the 10 S4, so we appreciate his support. Yeah. And I thought in this final panel,
Okay, thank you.
You know, so I thought in the end, I obviously have a lot to do with the program and what we're going to talk about at S4, and it's geared based on things that I think are important. And what I wanted to do was talk to these two gentlemen about maybe other things that we haven't talked about S4. So why don't I start out, Ralph, with you. What do you see as one, or you can mention more than one if you like, important issues that we're not addressing either at this conference or as an ICS community?
Yeah, well, first, before we go into the details, I think one important issue that next year we should have a pre-conference welcome party. I've been saying that to Dale for so many years now. But
by the way, you can thank Ralph for this moving down to South Beach. It only took him 4 years to convince me, but the reason we're in South Beach was his constant recommendation.
Yeah, but if I think about any subject matters that I believe are a bit underrepresented, two things come to my mind. And the first thing would be, I see a complete lack of a discussion on the IIoT at this conference. And I think this is very surprising, at least to me, because we should consider, or we should realize that this discussion is presently going on in full steam. But it's not led at this conference within this audience. And I think that's a bad thing. So as probably everybody in this room knows, there are a bunch of conferences on the IIoT. There are even a bunch of conferences on the security of the IIoT. Excuse me, but we so far we didn't discuss this in detail. And what you would probably guess is, if you actually go to any of these conferences, I just had the pleasure to keynote one of these conferences last fall, you would expect that you won't find a lot of ICS talent there. Including the speakers, and I don't think that's a good thing, that is a good development. So we're presently witnessing the IIoT or industrial internet discussion taken off as we speak, and we have little stakes in this discussion. And I think we should rather try to change that quickly. So if I remember my talk last year in fall in Washington, D.C., most people in the audience and also on the podium had very few ideas about how, let's just say, an industrial thing, as they called it, would be different from a smart toilet or a smoke detector, a wristband, smart wristband, and I think I had a bit of a hard time just bringing that point home, that if you are considering, let's just say, a big pump in an industrial setting, nobody in aerospace refers to that object as a thing, right? Because when you talk about it as a thing, you're completely stripping off its function and how that physical function is embedded or is meshed up with all the other actuators in that industrial setting. So I believe everybody in this audience should take an effort to participate in this ongoing discussion, make your voice be heard, because there is reason to assume that if we don't make ourselves heard with our subject matter expertise, we'll just revive history. So you'll see the same thing, in my opinion, as Dale alluded to at the end of his talk. You remember back in the 90s when everybody was going to Windows PCs and local area networks connecting to ICS, and all the ICS vendors were moving to add network interfaces to their products. And when that happened, the idea was, well, what's wrong with that? I mean, nothing bad is going to happen because you're just using that as an add-on. You're just using that to do our HMIs in a more cost-efficient manner. And you know, a couple of years later, everybody knows that it is a big deal, and this lack of thinking it through got us into the mess that we presently are. So just in brief, as everybody knows, when the vendors try to port their existing products to that Ethernet-based connectivity, they ported the protocols, etc., on a one-to-one basis. So they didn't realize that when you go from serial point to networks, that something like authentication would be a great idea. And now we have to live with that. And at the same time, those vendors told us, well, you know, nobody told you to connect all those devices and networks to the internet, right? So yes, you're using OPC, you're using DCOM, etc., but we are not telling that you should connect all these things to the internet. Fast forward, now the same vendors tell you the exact thing. Well, you got to connect everything to the internet, otherwise you're going to be out of business in a couple of years. We'll see protocols promoted as the core technology for the IIoT, not Modbus TCP necessarily, but for example, Profinet. Profinet is touted as the best networking protocol in order to make the IIoT happen. And just in case you didn't know, I trust many of you will know, Profinet does not include authentication. Ethernet IP does not include authentication. So this is my fear presently, that we're forced to repeat history. And I think, or I experience some kind of urgency here, because, as I said, this discussion is going on at full steam, and we are not participating in that.
So I think, knowing you all these years, I mean, we got a lot of IIoT presentations, suggestions, submittals that were primarily about, look how easy it is for me to hack this, you know, small device. And those probably aren't of great value to us, because we know, you know, if they weren't designed with security, just like we had 50 0 days in 2012, we could fill the whole agenda with this. And Zach, I'll ask you, and then maybe Ralph, you can chime in. What should we be talking about on IIoT when we get together and things like this? Or what should be the way we attack solving this problem?
Well, one of the things I've noticed over the years, and I've kind of changed my position after some events of the last 6 months or so, I used to always define things between the kind of internet of important things and the internet of trivial things. So I would always make fun of Nest thermostats or smart toilets, as you mentioned. You said that with a straight face, and I tried to do that myself as well. And then when you see, but we all knew the capability of a botnet of IoT devices, and sure enough, those trivial things became important en masse. So some of the consequences of what we do with the connected Internet of Things is one of the things we can talk about. But before I talk about some more of that and give it back to Ralph. I just want to talk about the theme of this conference this year, Come Together, and kind of congratulate Dale and applaud all the audience, because 10 years ago, when Dale was starting the S4, his premise was that we needed to bring a bunch of people from different parts of industry, of academia, the national labs, government together to talk about the problem, because there wasn't really a structured way of talking about OT type of cybersecurity in a way that was really meaningful for all of us. And I think that a lot of the other conferences that have come up in the meantime have been different formulations of S4, some bigger, some smaller, some less successful, but none of them that are any more important. And you've done a really great job of bringing this all together.
Appreciate
and
that.
I want everyone to.
Thank you. Thanks.
And
Well, with all those good words, now let's. So, did you have any? I mean, how should we be addressing this IIoT thing as a group? I know in my talk, one of the things I mentioned was I feel like just saying we're going to address IIoT is almost an impossible problem because it is so big. I mean, so one of my answers was taxonomy. We need to start saying, let's split this into cases we can deal with. But what do you, I guess Ralph, we'll start with you again. What do you think is a fruitful way to start talking about securing this?
Well, first of all, so again, remember, this discussion is already happening. Unfortunately, it's not happening on this stage. So there are a couple of other conferences, some of them focusing on security. As I said, the conference that I have attended last fall, it was the Security of Things Forum. So obviously they have a bunch of talks on security, on cybersecurity. Certainly I agree with you that it doesn't make a lot of sense demonstrating how to hack a Profinet installation. It is not very different from what we have seen in respect to Modbus and anything else that doesn't include authentication and any reasonable level of security. But I think, or at least I have seen and heard a couple of interesting thoughts, talks, elaborations on the subject. There are a bunch of smart people in that space, especially on the IT side of things, and they have some concepts for how trying to establish a secure IIoT, if we agree that we are going that way and that this is a good thing. Certainly I would put the emphasis on protective and mitigative strategies. I think we must have this discussion because it is clear to me that the risk that we are introducing with the IIoT is a magnitude bigger than what we did so far, because now you're just going to hyperconnectivity, and hyperconnectivity means you're also increasing your risk at the same time, because first the number of potential infiltration points is rising, and second, the cost of consequence, potential cost of consequence, is also going up as well. So we gotta have this discussion on how to secure this new thing, or maybe also include discussions on where it is definitely a bad idea to apply all these concepts, products, strategies, etc. I mean, Dale already gave a couple of good points in his talk, because again, this is happening right now as we speak, preventive, predictive maintenance, using remote access, and then the vendors, certainly, if only for convenience, they want to have all the functions available. They want to be able to theoretically completely reconfigure the remote device. And this is a discussion that I think is necessary to have, and also single out those areas which we might want to exclude. Another area would be include the regulators. What is our position as the ICS security community? What should we tell governments on where to place limitations, on which specific risks to observe and to limit? Because I'm under the impression that this input would actually or could make a big difference.
Well, one thing that I think, and Ralph hit on it initially, was that S4 should focus on IIoT, the industrial Internet of Things, as opposed to trying to solve that larger problem of consumer electronics, et cetera. IoT is also going to give us a new explosion of data when we've already been in the center of an initial explosion of data. So all of the sensors that we have out there that are coming in, people are trying to implement SIMs, but still trying to determine whether we use that SIM just at the OT floor, how do we integrate it with business, the IT-OT conflicts that we may have again, and then with IoT, that explosion of information, the potential to have even greater sensing capabilities out on plant floors and operations, but being able to aggregate all that data and make use of it. So potentially some of those areas that can talk about new ways to use data efficiently and effectively within control and OT might be something that would be appropriate for the S4.
Yeah, let me jump in on that, because that is a good junction to my second issue that I think is underrepresented in this conference, and that is the whole big field of security automation. My opinion is that if we don't get our act together rather soon on how to automate our procedures and strategy, we will be in a deep mess, because just of the complexity of the rising risk, we will and already are at some places no longer be able to try to address the problem by having a bunch of guys dedicated to the task, and they're meeting, let's just say, every week, and they're sitting in a room, and then they're discussing the risk, and they're doing some kind of analysis by hand. Well, I mean, folks, this is no longer going to work. This is 2017. You're drowning in data. We're drowning in complexity. And also remember that, that this human-driven effort just doesn't scale. We don't have enough experts. And the only way that we can solve this problem is by using automation. And I have to add that I'm very, very optimistic about that, because if you see the level of success in other fields, I mean, just remember the presentation on machine learning earlier today. If you see what other fields are doing presently using artificial intelligence, machine learning, you name it, modeling, to me it is out of the question that technically it can be done. We have the capability already, but we just failed so far to apply it to an area where most people agree. Well, just remember Obama's Executive Order 13636. Well, this is one of the most critical problems that we need to address, right? And let's just see what the next president is going to say about that.
Well, Ralph, one of the things that I think also comes and takes that to the next step, and when you made your list on day one of the different areas that you mentioned, and we did talk about machine learning today and some good aspects, but beyond automation, we're now talking in broader industries and in the defense, which is somewhat interesting, of autonomy as opposed to just automation, instead of human in the loop, but human on the loop. And some of the issues that we'll see with that, a lot of the artificial intelligence, machine learning programs that we see today, you cannot actually go and walk back and understand how they made that decision. It was a good decision. We programmed it correctly. It learned appropriately. It made the right decision. But we don't have the visualization tools, the math, the language to understand exactly how those decisions came about. And if we're going to move into autonomous systems for drones, for surveillance, for operations, then we need to be fully convinced of how those decisions have been made. And I think that's something that we're going to deal with, especially as we get into more automation, because the next step, we used to always say, oh, well, they'll never use wireless in this environment. And then 2 years later, oh, there'll be no such thing as a cloud-based control system, right? So if someone say to me, well, we'll never do autonomy in certain critical controls, I'll say, just wait 5 years and we'll go back there.
The security automation is kind of interesting in the sense that, and I'm trying to think of a parallel, and it doesn't, or an analogy, and it doesn't come to my mind. Right now, it's not being done at all. So you really, I shouldn't say at all, but it's not being done very much. The types of things that you're going to automate, it's being done in some places to some degree, but it's not one of these things where you have this process that's widely deployed and effective that you're automating. It's almost more that it's not widely deployed and effective, and maybe automation is the only way to get it done. I don't know if that's what you're saying, but are there examples where you go from not doing it well or not doing it to automation directly, make that big jump?
Well, first of all, I think we have already seen some very impressive examples of on how security automation can be applied. So, just for example, I just suggest for everybody, if you haven't already done so, to look up the DARPA Cyber Grand Challenge from last year and what they did. So, in a nutshell, they had hacking teams competing against each other. Every team tried to hack into the other systems, but the challenge was that they weren't actually allowed to use human input. So it was all pre-programmed. And the software that conducted the attacks also used some machine learning. So it has been able to identify or to search for new ways on how to hack into those other systems. And at the same time, the software also tried to do some self-healing, some self-patching. Just to give you an idea, so this is happening already. This happened last year. And what I believe we should do is to explore how all these existing approaches, technologies, I mean, ranging from the computing power that we presently have, like AWS, it's very cheap, and to the algorithms that are out there, to the case studies that have been done, and explore rather quickly how we can turn that into good use into our specific field, ranging from try to address complex tasks like how can I use that at some high-value facilities to protect high-value targets like nuclear power plants. Just as a reminder, we still don't have any good algorithms at this time to determine what the critical digital assets are at nuclear power plants. If you think that's easy, I can tell you it's very, very complex. So when the US nuclear industry started out defining a method for doing that, they were under the assumption they would end up with, let's just say, 20 or 30 critical digital assets, and now they were talking about a couple of hundred, if not thousands, critical digital assets, including those new plants who use analog safety systems. So that for me is, and I tried to allude to that problem in my talk last year on this stage. That suggests to me that we need to find some algorithms, some heuristic algorithms in order to address that tough problem. And certainly another area where I see a huge potential for security automation is everywhere where you need to scale up your efforts. So you're not looking at a low number of high-value targets, but you're looking at a high number of, let's just say, medium-value targets.
Yeah. Well, certainly automation would be seen as a way to help leverage some of the workforce shortages that we see by using the experts, in better. One of the things that we might also look at, you mentioned the DARPA Cyber Grand Challenge, but DARPA is also running a program now called Radix or Radix, depending on where you're from, that incorporates some elements of automatic recovery, automatic reconstitution, ways of developing alternative systems or testing systems after an event. I think a lot of the people here will be looking at those types of systems and how they might impact, what the impact might be of having that type of help come in to help you reconstitute your environment after what might be a significant event. And we can imagine something on the order of the Ukraine happening in the U.S. and how would be able to use external resources who may not have the full knowledge of your plant and its actual configuration, have autonomous or automatic systems be able to come in and identify configurations, rebuild blueprints, et cetera. So some of those things are also very interesting, but we'll all have to play a little bit of catch up. So look out there. The University of Illinois and some others are doing some good work in the area. Lots of companies, and when DARPA comes in, like they say, they will make a big splash. They'll hopefully bring enough brain power onto the project, have enough good results that we can then all leverage off them for the next 5 or 10 years. And we at the labs and some of the universities that are involved are hoping that, and working with the asset owners that are also involved with the project.
Okay, well, I want to make sure we give you time. So what Ralph said, here's a couple things we should be talking about here and also in the community as broader. What do you see as maybe things we're not paying enough attention to at S4 or the broader community as a whole?
Yeah, well, I love listening to Ralph talk. That's why I said yes when you asked me to come over. But well, one of my my pet peeves forever has always been metrics. I think that we've gotten away from the concern about really understanding, what to measure, how to measure it, and how it's impactful, and have just kind of, moved on. There have been several well-funded studies on metrics, and I think they all came back relatively inconclusive. And I think that has put a damper on the requirement because operations go on, right? So we have to look at other ways of measuring the performance and the impact of our systems. The other thing that I know Renee Taryn spoke about, and that we're very actively pursuing at INL, is looking more at a consequence-based approach to managing our systems and problems rather than trying to deal with threats that you may not fully understand, especially out in asset owner land. They don't have the full set of information on the threats. Vulnerabilities that are increasing and being discovered every day. It's hard to develop a risk paradigm when you can't keep those two variables anywhere near. But you know what the most severe consequences are in your environment. In safety engineering and other engineering disciplines, as she mentioned, we can use those consequence-based understandings to then engineer out some of the worst things that could happen to us. There's a new bill out, or another proposed bill, Senator King and Risch, that had caused a lot of press last year. And I think we've worked with the legislators collectively as a community to let them know that automation isn't bad, that computers in critical infrastructure is not bad, but there are appropriate uses for different technologies. Analog safety systems for critical systems, as opposed to having everyone use the same wires, the same devices, to be able to really mitigate some of these security concerns. And so that consequence-based approach, I think, is something that we'll be working on more this year, and you'll probably see a lot of different things come out for next year or maybe the year after's S4 conference on consequence-based types of approaches and pilots. I know we're just finishing up a pilot with a utility, and hopefully we'll have something good that we can come talk to you about with that as well.
Oh, good.
But it works across systems. So as I said before, other engineering paradigms, whether it's mechanical engineering, construction, et cetera, what do we have to do to make sure the building doesn't fall down, that the bridge does not sway in a violent wind? They look at those consequences, and those are the baseline engineering things that we need to do. I think that we'll start seeing that in both retrofits for critical assets and also in new engineering architectures.
The metrics is kind of interesting, and it ties a little bit way back to what I talked about in the mini keynote. As you start to talk to your board of directors and your C-levels, and you say, we have these problems, we need to do something, they're looking for some quarterly report that shows we were here, we wanted to get here, and where are we, and perhaps raising that bar. So the driver for the metrics, I think you talked, I don't know how many S4s ago, like 6 or 7 ago.
Absolutely.
With Mark Fabro about metrics. I think at that point, and there's still a need for them, but they were very technical engineer, security person kind of metrics.
Yes. And the other problem that we had with the metrics was that we couldn't link it back to security. We started, learning how to measure things, but couldn't necessarily measure the absolute impact on making yourself more secure. Someone mentioned that in one of the talks earlier here today. IT security guys, OT security guys, you're a problem to me. You go to this conference S4, and you come back and you want more money for more security. So can you tell me that, if I give you this money, that we'll be secure in 6 months? Well, no, not really. Well, that will be more secure, and you can tell me how much more secure we'll be. Well, we still don't have that capability either. Right now, benchmarking and comparing ourselves to other members of the industry and not trying to outrun the bear, too much, but just outrunning the competition used to be a good benchmark. But if there's an adversary that's looking to impact you, it doesn't matter what your peers are doing, because it's your security that matters, not the aggregate.
So are you optimistic about metrics? I mean, and I'll ask Ralph the same question. You think in 2 years from now we'll have useful metrics that are at least consensus agreed upon for how you determine how secure your ICS is?
Not at all. Right now, I don't think that we're studying the metrics problem the way we had been in the past, that we've gone back to doing more effective operations, more understanding risk and consequences. And that may be a good thing, but I still think that we need to come back to the area of metrics later on. The other big thing that has been brewing for 10 years along with the metrics is the science of cybersecurity. And once again, we can't really become more of a scientific or truly engineering discipline as opposed to a black art until we have those measures where we can compare the actual capabilities of one intrusion detection system versus another in absolute terms, and rather than just the effectiveness of the user interface, whether it's appealing to the user and then at least still use it, but true effectiveness.
So Ralph, if and you may disagree, but if you agree that metrics are something that are important, what's your feeling on them? Is this something that is achievable in the next 1 to 2 or 3 years, or is this something that we'll be chasing 5 years from now?
I have a great feeling about metrics because you're using metrics in the RIPE cybersecurity program now for 2 years.
OT base.
No. That's OT base is the software product, but
okay.
But the programmatic effort that we're using comes with metrics. Since 2 years since the introduction of the program, and we are seeing the results. And the asset owners, the clients, are happy with that because they just as anybody would guess. So you can do comparisons, you can benchmark yourself against your peers, you can do comparisons. How did we perform in the last cycle? What are our goals in that specific domain for the next cycle? And that works just great. And I think the one aspect you should think very hard about. We never made an effort to reach any consensus in the community. Okay, so what I'm now talking about, what we're doing with our clients, is completely proprietary. However, I would also assume that if you would have a discussion on what we're actually doing, most of you would agree that this makes absolute sense. It might not be perfect, it certainly is not perfect, but it's useful. So in my opinion, the problem that we are self-imposing on many of our efforts is to reach a consensus first before we start to do anything. I think that's a flawed approach, especially because you're running out of time. We don't have the luxury to get our act together over a decade, like with all the big standardization efforts that you see going on at IEC, at ISA, etc. I don't believe that we have that luxury. I think presently our biggest problem is that we are outrun, not just by the threats, by all the attackers in this world, but just by the complexity alone. This has been my approach for the last couple of years. Don't wait until you reach any consensus. Again, I'm happy to have a debate on the metrics that we're using, and the basics are actually published in the white paper, the RIPE OT security framework that you can find on the internet. But experience has shown it works. It works pretty well. It is not perfect, but it helps guide the effort for our clients, for the asset owners. Even we have a regulator who is quite happy with that approach. So I'm probably much more optimistic than you are.
And I will agree that we definitely can't wait for a consensus or even a right solution, that we have to try things and see when they work and then spread the word throughout the industry. So I totally agree with your approach, and I think that RIPE is another good mechanism for that. But once again, as someone mentioned before, that some machine learning algorithms or maybe the motion sensor of a game that can predict your movements, once they got it working, they went back and they said, we really don't know why it works, but it's working well. And I think for it to be the science, we really have to be able to understand, because then we won't be able to push off from it to the next step.
One thing that I heard throughout a number of sessions, and I just heard it again, is this concept of time. That our cycle time in this space is traditionally very slow. We're very slow adopters. I think Brian Owen brought it up in the certification panel. If you're talking about certifying products and you're writing new code every 3 weeks or 12 weeks and deploying it, with what you mentioned about IIoT, I mean, they're running full speed. They're not going to wait for this community to catch up. Do you have any idea how we accelerate this community ability to bring in change and bring in new ideas? I mean, you've been to so many conferences in your roles over the years. You know this community very well. how do we change that culture so that we do the change quickly?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily, say, this community, the community of engineers, cybersecurity professionals, OT professionals. We're all ready to jump in. I've mentioned to both you guys before that I'm so sick of hearing about the latest wake-up call that we've had in the industry. It's amazing any of us get to sleep at all, because every week, every month, there's a new flavor attack of the day, and it's like, oh, this will change everything, right? CEOs are now on board, and I call it the half-life of awareness sometimes. When something bad happens, if nothing else bad happens in a week, it dies down. In a month, it dies down again, and once again, people have other problems that they have to focus on.
Right.
And so, I'm not one of those, who likes to tout the cyber Pearl Harbor, but things do happen. Attacks have happened, botnets of IoT devices, et cetera. We see all this happening, but until it happens to a specific industry or a specific company, they don't tend to be on board until they've had their own awakening, and we have to be able to leverage the awakenings, if nothing else.
I would also think that we're observing some kind of a mindset problem here. I think that overall the mindset in the whole factory automation community, and even in some parts of the cybersecurity community or in the OT security community, is pretty static. Like, let's just wait what is evolving in terms of standards, for example. So what I would like to see, and I think we are seeing the beginnings of this, is that some smart people, some smart companies, some innovative companies just start to get bold again. Just turn back the clock a couple of decades. I think when Modicon, decades ago, developed the Modbus protocol, it was kind of bold. I mean, they just threw it in. So I cannot imagine that they had a real task force working for weeks or months on the protocol definition. To me, it appears like this was done over a weekend, like a rainy weekend, and then some engineers said, well, I have nothing better to do, nothing good on TV, so I just defined that protocol. And I have been missing that same spirit. Well, let's just come up with a smart solution, and we'll see. Chances are, if it's really smart and if it produces some benefit, then the market will actually use that. So in this respect, I want to encourage everybody, just come up with your smart solutions. And I'm actually pretty optimistic that we are in a time where change is about to happen. In this area, in this field, change is about to happen. So as most of you will know, there are a couple of startups recently which have successfully raised a lot of venture capital. I think the time is ripe for entrepreneurs, for smart companies, or even scientists, if you're working at the academia, to just come up with a smart solution. And I think the chances have never been better that this complete static environment will pick up your solution, and you will have defined the next de facto standard. Let's just hope it's going to be better than Modbus.
Yeah. Well, I think you have a good point there, and timing is a lot. I know a lot of innovators and inventors, obviously work in the last 9 years with DHS S&T. And the cycle times for government procurement, industry procurement, and others can be very long. But if there's a solution that's needed, they'll buy things. And I think that at the time Modbus came out, there was getting ready to be an explosion of automation, at that level. And they were there at the right time with one of the first things available. I think that, as you mentioned now, there is getting ready to be another explosion, and trying to foresee the types of things that people will need, the way to bring autonomy or automation, and I'm not sure that autonomy is something that we're ready for yet. Within this IoT area, with all of the data that we're going to have, be able to use that data for the sensing of operations, of security, of other areas, may be the thing that will get us to that next phase.
Okay, well, why don't we close with, I mentioned again at the beginning of the conference, this Peter Thiel question, what is something that you believe to be true that most of your colleagues and other people in the industry disagree with? And Zach, I'll let you go
No one
first.
disagrees with anything I say, right? That's what happened there.
It's always easy for me because I'm so disagreeable, but I'm sure it's tough for you.
So I think I've already mentioned. I think that true metrics are really important, and we're going to miss the fact that we don't have them very soon. And I would beat the drum for studying metrics and getting a baseline so that we know where we're at in the future.
That's interesting. So you think that the importance of metrics is not recognized by the community?
And I don't think we're doing anything about it.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, as for me, so I think what most people disagree on with me is that I am convinced, absolutely convinced, that we can solve this problem. We can make critical infrastructure cyber secure. Just do it.
Yes, I actually don't disagree with you on that. I think there's actually a session I did at S4 Europe called "Defense Will Win," and people were just shocked. But I really think we have advantages in our sector that are completely different.
Dale has changed. I mean,
I don't know. Maybe it was,
I don't know what
maybe
that-
it was
I don't know
my
what that new diet
daughter
is, but
or
I'm gonna
something. I
start
don't know.
eating more
Perhaps it
fiber or
was.
something.
But in any event, I really appreciate you guys coming up here and sharing your thoughts and raising some new things that maybe people can discuss over beer. I hear them pouring beer behind us, so I'm hoping they're ready for the craft beer bash. If they're listening back there, you need to remember to bring up the ramp or they'll storm the stage and they won't be able to get up here.
But they'll be behind us.
But I guess I just like to close the event, if we could, just by again thanking our sponsors. We couldn't have put on the event without them. Thanking all our speakers for traveling so far and working so hard on their work and their research. I hope you enjoyed that, and if you did, I hope you reached out to the speakers and gave them your thoughts and ideas. If you see Liz Daly and the Daily Events crew, please thank them. They put on all the fun things, are all their responsibility, so if you had fun here, they definitely were a big part of that. And lastly, again, as I said at the beginning, I do appreciate you all coming. It means a lot that you'll spend your time here. I hope you got some value out of it, and we hope to see you again next year. S418 is January 16th through 18th back here in Miami South Beach. And with that, if you're ready, are we ready for the beer? Can we open the curtains? Okay, thank you. S4 is closed.
Dale?
All attendees are now welcome to come on the S4 main stage for the Craft Beer Bash and personally thank the speakers, sponsors, and staff for helping make S4 17 happen.